Gaza is tensed. Funerals are being held for the 58 people killed yesterday when Israeli troops opened fire on Palestinian protesters. Some viewers may find the following visuals disturbing. The Gaza Health Ministry said 58 Palestinians were killed on Monday, including 57 by Israeli fire and a baby who died from tear gas inhalation. The 8-month-old was exposed to the gas east of Gaza City during Monday's protests. In addition, more than 2,700 were hurt, among them 1,360 by gunshot. Of the wounded, 130 were in serious or critical condition.
هي اللي قتلت بنتي قتلوها في الغاز اللي بقتل الأطفال والشباب والاختيارية بنت 8 شهور. ايش ذنبها هذه؟ ايش ذنبها؟
The high casualty toll in Gaza revived international criticism of Israel's use of lethal force against unarmed protesters. Monday was the deadliest day of violence there since a war in 2014. Israel has defended its actions, saying troops were defending its border. It also accused Hamas militants of trying to carry out attacks again under the cover of the protests. Monday's protests also targeted the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, viewed as a major provocation by the Palestinians and the Arab world. South Africa has withdrawn its ambassador to Israel, Ngobane, following Israel's deadly attack in the Gaza Strip. The International Relations Department strongly condemned the latest acts of violence carried out by Israeli armed forces along the Gaza border. Dozens of civilians have been killed and scores others injured in the latest assault. The victims were taking part in a peaceful protest against the inauguration of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem.
The South African government condemns in the strongest terms possible the latest act of violent aggression carried out by the Israeli armed forces along the Gaza border, which has led to the deaths of 40 civilians, and we are told today that the death toll has risen. The victims were taking part in a peaceful protest against the provocative inauguration of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. The latest attack has resulted in scores of other Palestinian citizens reported injured, and the number of injured by 10 o'clock yesterday was at 2.7 thousand people injured. Given the indiscriminate and grave manner of the latest attack on the Palestinian people, the South African government has taken a decision to recall Ambassador Ngobane with immediate effect until further notice. As we have stated on previous occasions, the South African government reiterates its views that the Israeli Defense Force must withdraw from the Gaza Strip and bring to an end the violent and destructive incursions into Palestinian territories. South Africa maintains further that the violence in the Gaza Strip will stand in the way of rebuilding a peaceful solution to the problem in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, South Africans from all walks of life took part in a march to Parliament in solidarity with the people of Palestine.
We cannot be friends with people who maim and murder children. We're a human rights-orientated country, and what we want for ourselves, we must want for other people. And we know that at the moment in Gaza, people are struggling for food. We know because we speak to the people in Gaza every day. We're not hearing that from any newspaper cutting. We also know that our friends and the people of Palestine are standing at the fence because they want to go back to their land. Their land was taken away in 1948. It needs to be given back to them. You know, at the ANC's 54th conference, we took a resolution in which we instructed our government to downgrade the embassy of Israel in South Africa to a liaison office. So we're saying to our minister, thank you for recalling our ambassador from Tel Aviv. That's one part of the instruction that we gave to her. She's complied. The second half is to now deal with the Israeli ambassador here in Pretoria. No country can proclaim a capital city of another area. That is unheard of. So we're saying that it's time for solidarity internationally, worldwide.
The Youth League is part and parcel of this march. In fact, we've been part even of the planning of this particular march with the ANC, because our mother body, the ANC and the Youth League, have always shared a historical relationship with the struggle of the people of Palestine. We as South Africans identify with such a struggle because our land was taken away by imperialists and colonialists, just like the land of the Palestinian people. So we are commemorating 70 years of dispossession on the part of the Palestinians, and we've been taking the stances. It's because of the pressure by organizations like the ANC Youth League and others that today we find the South African government, the ANC-led government, withdrawing the ambassador from Israel. We express our condolences to the Palestinian people for what has happened yesterday, but we are also proud. We are proud that it's been young people who laid down their lives, young people who went out in the streets, expressed the spirit of resistance against the Israeli regime. So while we are obviously mourning those deaths, at the same time we're also celebrating the struggle. Those who lost their lives yesterday will continue to be alive in the consciousness and memory of those who stand up for human rights and justice.
Now joining us on the story via Skype is John Stremlow, an international expert. Mr. Stremlow, thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, this has been labeled as a day of mayhem and a day of bloodshed. What is your take on South Africa's perhaps response to this mayhem and bloodshed from yesterday? Because many still say that in as much as you're going to downgrade the embassy to an liaison office, really you touch a country when you destabilize its economy. So are we doing enough in that respect?
Well, it's a complicated topic for South Africa to grapple with, and I applaud very much the statement that Lindiwe Sisulu made today in the Parliament, because it did not only condemn the use of force toward the Palestinians who were demonstrating their grievances that have accumulated over 70 years, the right of return, but also linked it to the U.S. opening the embassy.
And then beyond this, the Hamas factor, though, because here, for the longest time, we've had Israel saying that you've got this militant grouping that hides behind, the Palestinians' issues. Do you think that that on its own becomes a problem and we deflect from the real issues?
Well, the real issue is the injustice being done to the Palestinians that has been done since 1948 when they were relocated to these Bantustans. I've been to Gaza and I've seen it. It's just inhumane. But the bigger question is why the U.S. and Israel insist that the only guilty party here is the Hamas militant group that is absolutely frustrated, when in fact the correlation of forces, as your report said earlier, is so disproportionate. You have stone throwers going against airplanes and drones that are dropping tear gas that killed that little girl. The question, though, is what is going to be done about it? And I despair, frankly. The stupidity of Donald Trump to inflame this situation by moving the embassy, and he really hasn't moved the embassy, he's just renamed the consulate as the embassy, infuriating the Palestinians and foreclosing any possibility that the U.S. can play any role as long as he's president in trying to encourage a peace agreement. So could South Africa, in company with others, move the situation from its stalemate? I don't think easily, because the power is in so much in the Israeli hands, and the U.S. backs the Israel. This is not a new story. I've been with this for 70 years. I'm an old guy, and I've never seen it so bad as it is right now.
But then Benjamin Netanyahu's government always maintains that they are merely targeting Hamas, not ordinary citizens.
And the White House says the same thing, that the peaceful demonstrations the U.S. is in favor of, but not armed struggle like the Hamas is accused of doing. And I don't doubt for a moment that Hamas is doing, as indeed the ANC at a certain point finally had to shift off of nonviolence for millions story, but you blame the victims rather than the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is the unwillingness of the Israelis, in this case with Jerusalem, to take the hard problem of how you manage a city where Jews, Christians, and Muslims all pray devoutly. That should not be so hard. It should be an international city with guaranteed privileges for all, so Jerusalem be safe for all who live there and united in their diversity, to use the South African phrase. But the Israelis insist that this is exclusively their capital. They occupied it in the 67 Six-Day War, and they're refusing in the hard line there. And Netanyahu is the hardest of the hardliners. He's been pushing for this moving of the embassy, even though most Israelis think this is just a symbolic gesture. They believe that Jerusalem is their capital, and okay, but they shouldn't get away with that without being challenged. And I don't see who's going to challenge them effectively, because the Arab world is divided on this issue, and the U.S. is allied with Israel. So you're in a very, very desperate situation for the Palestinians, and we give them our sympathy, but I wish we could do more, and I just don't see what that would be.
That becomes the question here, because this conflict is decades old, the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. But if all we can do is to condemn, and so do other countries around the world condemn, then what needs to happen? Or are we going to watch people continue to perish?
The problem is, and I say this with a broken heart, because when I was in Israel in the 80s, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Ben Venisti, told me he could not bear to go to South Africa because he didn't want to see the West Bank, Gaza on a grand scale. And we all thought South Africa would descend into chaos and violence, and somehow, through the genius of this country's ability to negotiate a meaningful constitution that's the envy of the world, you got beyond that. And I don't see within the Israeli equation the possibility of that happening, because it's got to be done by those people who are going to have to live together in the long term. And the Norwegians in the 90s did broker the Oslo Peace Accord, which didn't have the United States in the middle of it. And maybe South Africa, working with the Scandinavians, maybe could re-energize, because this peace process is going nowhere. But so long as Netanyahu is in the prime ministership, and he's got corruption charges against him, as you know, and Trump is in the presidency, and he could be brought down by his obstruction of justice and other crimes and misdemeanors that Robert Mueller is looking into. But until there's a change, I just don't see how you can move from A to B.
No, Mr. Stremlow, thank you very much for your time. And now to continue this conversation in studio, we're joined by Dudu Masango, who's the National Coordinator for the South African Council of Churches. Ms. Masango, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We talk of the bloodshed. I mean, this is the most disturbing story, just to be reporting on it right now. What is your take as a council of the developments around this conflict that continues?
Thank you for having me on the studio. As you say, it's a very disturbing story, and just to clear the air, for me, it's not just a story. I visit Palestine every year, once a year. So it's not just a story, it's about the people that I meet there. It's about the people that I've made connections with. And what we see on the ground, you easily connect back to the people that you have seen eyes and you have made relations with. And coming from the council to see such bloodshed in just one day, over 60 people have died, we're asking ourselves, what is happening? Where is the humanity in the people that are killing? What happens to them when they see this happening? Because you don't fire with your eyes closed, but you fire with your eyes quite open, wide open. And you do see it's young people that you are killing.
But Netanyahu's government maintains that this is in retaliation. So clearly you've got two sides that cannot find each other.
And then you ask yourself, when they say it's in retaliation, you look at the pictures that you are sent. What do the Palestinians have in their hands? They have only stones. And you look at what the Israeli soldiers are having in their hands, it's sniper shots. So who is retaliating really? Let us be fair and look at the picture clearly. and really, really look at the humanness in the whole thing.
Not to place too much blame on the United States or Donald Trump's decision to reverse this position of the United States around recognizing Benjamin Netanyahu, particularly Jerusalem, as theirs. But, I mean, how much of a role has he played in what we saw yesterday?
Actually, honestly speaking, this has been going on for years.
Yes.
So what Donald Trump has done has just put a stamp on what Benjamin Netanyahu and the rest of them, the Ariel Sharon, who have been cooking this up for the past 70 years or so. So he has just put a stamp on to say this is now the final of it, the creation of a Zionist state, which as the South African Council of Churches we are saying, where in the world have we seen a religious state anywhere in the world? It has never happened. This will be the first of everything. So we cannot allow that to happen. What about the other religions that are there? If we allow that this becomes a Jewish state, what about the Christians? What about the Muslims? There are churches, there are mosques. And these are the three Abrahamic faiths who believe that the Holy Land belongs to three of all of them. So if we allow that as a country, especially as South Africans, what are we saying about our Christianity, our religion?
Because
what are we saying to the people?
We certainly identify with this struggle, but perhaps we rope in Shanila Mohammed from Amnesty International South Africa. She happens to be the Executive Director. Ms. Mohammed, thank you very much for your time. Your take on at least South Africa's response to this conflict? Ms. Mohammed, I don't know if you can hear me, but can you just give us your take on South Africa's response to yesterday's deadly bloodshed, or at least battle that occurred?
Hi there. Well, I think that South Africa's response is an indication of what countries can do in order to respond to the deadly violence against the protesters in Gaza. So from our side, I think that, we actually think South Africa has taken, the fact that they've taken this decision is an indication of what can be done. Hello?
Hello, Ms. Mohammed, I can still hear you.
Okay, but what I was going to say that, we now have to move to a point where we go beyond just, sort of surface type of actions. And, Amnesty has been on the ground and has been documenting the violence that's been happening in Gaza. And, for us, we think that, countries have to now go beyond the rhetoric and, have to really take some firm actions. And the things that we're calling for is for countries that are supplying arms to Israel to stop with immediate effect. There needs to be an arms embargo. And we're also calling on the International Criminal Court to actually step up and take some action against Israel. Because, what has been happening there, the use of the high-velocity weapons is a grave breach of the Geneva Convention, and Israel is violating international law all the time, and with impunity, with no action being taken.
Mema Sango, your take on that arms embargo, or perhaps now countries coming together?
Very true. Like she says, your previous guest was saying, it is now time to move beyond where we are saying statements. It is now time to move beyond that and take serious action, rather what we call costly solidarity. And when we say costly solidarity to a South African, it is a very understandable word. That what we mean is we move beyond words, but we take constant action in terms of, for example, we laud what the South African government has done in recalling our ambassador. But what should be done now is to sanction Israel in a very obvious way. Expel the Israeli ambassador from South Africa and cut off all the ties with Israel. So that, and if we do that, firstly, as South Africa as a government, most other countries will follow suit. Why I say so? Because we fruits of sanctions. We are here today, we are free today because of boycott, divestments and sanctions.
Yes.
And if we are the first people to take that lead, all other countries will follow suit because we understand what it means.
But why
we know
the
what it did for us.
Like at this point, in as much as they've moved, they've condemned, we've had our protests, but that second step, what has prevented that second phase of this boycott?
I wouldn't say it's a prevention as such. Again, let us look at the issue of how things have developed. So there is a lot that needs to go in place. As South Africa, I know that our government have tried to let the two people sit down and negotiate peacefully. So there is a lot of steps that needs to be taken. But at the same time, we need now to look at the numbers or the number of people that have now died, the masses that have died. We can no longer say we take too long. As much as we were trying to negotiate quite some time, but now it's time to say enough is enough. We have given you space, but you're no longer listening. So we move forward as a country in terms of saying we're sanctioning you.
Shamila, your closing remarks on this particular issue?
Well, I think that, if you, one of the things that concerns us is, as Amnesty International, is the fact that Israel is using live ammunition, is using the type of weaponry that it is against unarmed Palestinians. And yes, there are Palestinians who are throwing rocks and stones, but the type of response is just not at all anywhere near what it should be. And, when you look at, Amnesty has documented and worked with other organizations to document the damage that's being done. And if you see what that ammunition is doing to the bodies of these people, you have got bullets, high velocity bullets that are going in there that are tearing bones to shred. You are literally looking at warfare against an unarmed population who is not the threat that they pretended to be. Most of these people are between 150 and 400 meters away from the fence. So, it's not even as if they're right close up. And I think that, the fact that the world is not talking about this in the way that they should be, and the fact that these people are still being given the USA has pledged $38 in military aid to Israel, and then you have the EU, France, Germany, the UK, Italy are also supplying arms and weaponry to Israel, and they're using this against unarmed Palestinians. And I think it's about time that we stood up, took notice, and asked them to stop sending arms to Israel so that they can use it against unarmed Palestinians.
No, the arms conversation is one that really needs to be unpacked even further. But ladies, thank you very much for your time. More news and updates on the other side of this break.